this piece is about growing older, expectations, who you are. They happen to be very special people because they're opera singers, but they're no different, as you see in the play, than you and I or your mother or your grandmother or grandfather would be. And that's what I find so endearing and lovely about the production, is that it focuses on people who have had fairly successful, satisfying lives coming to the end of their life and looking back on their lives and figuring out where they are and where they're going. And we all do that. It doesn't matter if we're opera singers or directors or steel workers or waitresses. Doesn't matter what we are. We all deal with the same process of aging, and how you look at it and how it's different for every single human being. Well, my approach to directing when I first started was very different than it is now. I thought a director needed to be in control. Whereas I have found, over the years of directing, especially with a cast like we have for Quartet, who are very skilled, seasoned actors, you need to know the story you want to tell and then get out of the way and let the actors tell the story. I think I was much more of a dictator when I was younger because I wasn't that self-assured. And now I know that it's the story that gets told is the playwright tells the story, but it's your actors that take that story, make it personal, and make it come alive on stage. So basically, I get the heck out of the way. Well, the challenges of the show for me are that I'm not as schooled in the world of opera as I should be, so I had a big learning curve on that. I love opera, but I love it the way anybody would love it. I mean, as an audience member, I didn't know the things that perhaps I should have known. So therefore, last year when when I fell in love with the piece and decided we were definitely going to do it, I started really studying and learning about conductors, about singers, about the specific opera, Rigoletto. And then, so that was one of the big challenges for me. And then the next challenge was to find actors that were of an age that could still do a script as verbally dense as this one. I was fortunate enough, we have 3 actors I've worked with a number of times, and then I happily through America Rising discovered an actress who's new to the area, and she fit right in. I mean, she's just like she's always been here. So I'm very excited about this cast. Our rehearsal process was a bit trying this time. About 2 days before we were to start rehearsals, a pipe in our rehearsal studio sprang a leak. And we had to, all of a sudden, rip the whole insides of the building out, and we had no place to rehearse. Thank heavens Grundy Commons offered us a space to rehearse in, which was lovely. I mean, it was great. It had, on the 7th floor, had beautiful windows. Practically spoiled us for ever rehearsing anywhere else again. But it was trying because we spent a couple days trying to figure out what we're going to do, and then Fred very thankfully offered his space to us. So I think you should look for in this production, even though, as I said earlier, they are opera singers, which you think you would have nothing in common with. But I promise you, look for what you recognize in yourself, in your friends, in your family, because it's surprising to me how little difference there is in human beings, no matter what walk of life they are in. Cord was a find and a half, our set designer. Uh, he is very conversant and designs a lot for opera. And I talked about the learning curve thing. He was very instrumental and helpful in suggesting things that were quite magnificent that I did not have the depth of knowledge of that world enough to suggest. So,
One of the things I love about an intimate space like this is making sure that the performers are in the same zip code as the audience. Intimate theater, this exchange of energy between the actors and the audience, is one of the reasons that in 2017 people still go to see live theater, because you get something there that you can't get in a movie. And in this instance, what I've done is created a thrust into the auditorium that isn't typical for this space, but it means that the performers are really sitting in the audience's laps. And given that it's a play with four actors who are not wearing body mics, I think that's really important, both so that everybody can hear everything and that you really feel an intimate connection with the performers and their story. So that is sort of how I've tackled creating a drawing room in Kent, in the countryside of England, for BRT. I think that the best design is an extension of the storytelling. If you have all the money in the world, you might be able to make something really impressive happen, but none of that matters to me if you're not focused on the performer. So what I've done is try to create in this show and in a lot of my work, most of my work, is create an environment that supports what the performer is doing. For instance, I know this play has a lot of intimate exchanges between 2 to 4 people, so the space needs to sort of be able to cinematically zoom in so that you're really focused on a conversation between 2 people. And I've created spaces on stage where that can happen, really far down stage, really intimate things within a bigger environment. So it sort of is about shifting focus between the big picture and a smaller picture when you've only got 2 people or sometimes even 1 person on stage, so that you're really sharing in this experience that the character is having. So every show that I do begins with the text. I read the play 2 or 3 times before I have a single conversation with the director. The next stage is to see what themes in the play the director is interested in exploring in our production. For instance, if I were doing this show in another space with another director or with the same director at a different point in their lives, it might look completely different than it does in this case. So what our director and founding artistic director, Susan Atkinson, was interested in exploring in the show is the sweetness of what this story of 4 people growing older gracefully really is. What I love about the play is that it exists on a level, if you're an opera fan, there's a lot of inside jokes that you'll really get and really celebrate. If you're not, it doesn't matter. It's not intimidating. It's another layer of something that you can appreciate. And so that was, and I have a background in opera, so Susan was interested in exploring that with me. The next step is always research. I created a folder full of pictures and shared them with her. Susan was able to look at those and say, yes, I respond to this in this image, this in this image, and this in that. And then stepping away from the research, we start to create a theatrical reality. My next stage is always going into what I call thumbnail sketches, and they're a quick exploration of what the world might look and feel like before we spend any money on buying materials or time in the scene shop or the painters or the props master. So all of those ideas are explored in sketch first. And then once I get buy-off on what that's going to look like in a kind of pre-visualized way, I'll dive into a model. And the model is basically a miniature version of what the set is going to look like. And it looks like a cute little dollhouse, but it's actually a really useful tool. The director and I can sit down and move tiny little people 1.5 inches tall through the space and basically stage through the entire play. So that's how we sort of know that there's proof in concept. The idea is going to work because it works in this scale. That's where I test out what finishes we're going to use in the scenery, what colors of everything is going to be. And that's really my form of communication with my collaborators, Linda B., who's doing the costumes, and Karen Spahn, who's lighting the show, so that they know what I'm thinking as far as the world of color temperature. Is it a warm, inviting, cozy space? Is it a scary, negative, violent space? And it's not for this show. It is cozy and warm. But we all need to know what cozy and warm looks like to us right now. So that's what the model is really for. I'll move from there into technical drafting, not unlike an architect, and those are the drawings that go to our very talented scene shop, where the scenery is actually breathed into life. What I think is crazy about what I do as a designer, if I do my job well, nobody in the audience sees anything that my hands have actually touched. It really does take a village to get a show like this on stage, and we've got a crew of at least a dozen people who are out there with hammers and nails and staple guns and screw guns and paintbrushes and hot glue guns. And all of that is what goes together to get a show on stage. Because I am an opera geek, anyone who's seen the movie Moonstruck may remember the scene where Nicolas Cage takes Cher to the opera for the first time, and she feels like she's a movie star. And she gasps and grabs her pearls as the chandeliers at the Met start to fly out very slowly as the house lights fade. And it truly is a glorious thing, and they didn't make it up for the movie. The Met really does do that at the beginning of every performance. The house lights fade and fly out. And we have a moment where we sort of have a flashback to these four opera singers who are now in retirement, reliving their former glory. And I've quoted the chandeliers flying out at the Met in a way that it just makes me giggle and smile. And when I first proposed the idea to Susan, it made her giggle and smile too. So I knew we were on the same page and on the right track.
Well, I think for me, being a new person to BRT, it was just a challenge to learn what this stage was like, and it's a very small theater, and I needed to figure out the best lighting angles, the best lighting positions, and I relied heavily on the people that had worked here before to give me some advice of where to put lights. It is a very challenging set because it's two spaces, and it's not a symmetrical set, so that in itself makes it a challenge, and the challenge of trying to keep a very distinct outside look and a very distinct inside look, so you always knew where you were. Sometimes you go very much just for the mood, and you kind of ignore, so to speak, the realistic aspects of the show, but I felt that this was a very realistic set, a realistic show, and it's done in time. So like Act 1 is an hour long, and the whole scene lasts an hour. We're not trying to jump ahead in time or back in time. I thought to start with the time of day was the best way to go, and then if I could, in certain instances, kind of shape the space, shape the mood with a little bit of changes in color, changes in lighting, just for those moments, but always coming back to the realistic aspect of the time of day that's happening in the show. I collaborated with Court a lot. I have to say that I did not speak a lot to this costume designer, but I knew that it was a very realistic show as far as costuming was going, so I didn't feel I had to worry about costumes in a very strange color or something like that. But working with Court was very important. He sent me the set design and for me to look at to see if there were any challenges or anything that I thought was going to be an issue for me. Definitely thought, knowing that he wanted a chandelier in the space, and chandeliers, hanging lights can be very much a challenge for a lighting designer, casting shadows on people, getting in the way. I was very concerned about that aspect more than anything else, and we talked about it, and he gave me the smallest chandelier he could give me and still get the look he wanted, and I was able to work around it. Well, as a lighting designer, I kind of hope nobody notices the lighting. I mean, to me, if that is if someone goes and knows it's a lovely show and it was a beautiful set and all the actors look great, but this isn't the kind of show for me that you want to show off the lighting. I want to make sure everybody knows where to look. That's a very important, since we have various conversations happening on stage at any given time. So I want to make sure that if somebody's, the most important thing is for someone to see people talking on the terrace, that's where the focus should be. And the people that are in the room just kind of listening, they're not as in focus. So I want to direct the audience's eyes around the stage, but I don't want them to know that I'm doing it.
Yeah, some of the challenges in this production were kind of just getting everything in the room, in the hands as quickly as possible. I feel like that's pretty typical for any production. But with such a small group of actors, getting them in their hands as soon as I could and getting the right things in their hands so they could really get used to everything that they had to work with, because there was a lot of like very particular hand props that were in this show. Yeah. So that's the thing about props, is that it's not just, you know, glasses sitting out or a picture that they hold or something that the actor actually touches, but it can also be the vines on the lattice, the picture frames on the piano, and things that dress the stage is just as much as what things they hold. So yeah, most of the time I source my props from other theaters. In this show particularly, I went to Arden Theater, and there are a few prop houses throughout Philadelphia and New Jersey that we can use pretty heavily. ABC, Anything But Costumes. A guy I know in Philadelphia who does film work, he goes by Ratface. I get a ton of stuff from him. And in this particular show, I even went to the library to get some like music and things that just kind of sit in the whole setting of what this world has really gotten to become. So everything's very musical. So we got a lot of music on the stage, on the piano. So I pretty much went to all sources I could possibly get for this one. This show, I didn't have to make too much. There were a lot of things that we had to be repurposed. The CD cases that you see with their names on there, we printed out and repurposed old CD cases. And so there was some like crafting involved for sure, but I don't think I had to make anything from scratch, which was actually pretty nice. The garment bags we bought, but they're just really long, so we had to like sew those under. The Carmen shawl that sits on the piano had to be sewn because it was in pieces. It was just this beautiful shawl that had been torn apart and in little bits and pieces. So we had to go back and kind of tack it all together so that it could sit nicely. Surprisingly, the most difficult prop for the show was finding CD players. They are not in existence in our world anymore with technology advancing as much as it has. CD players were pretty hard to find. A lot of times I try to find my props in person rather than just going right to Amazon. That way I know what it is, I can touch it, I know if I can return it easily, and all the peculiarities of that. But surprisingly, people kept questioning my motives when I was like, can I have a CD player? So yeah, CD players, we found 2 from ABC, and I found another one in a thrift store and another one I had to buy. And they're surprisingly expensive when you buy them brand new. The technology is out of date, but yet still very expensive. So yeah, CD players. What I find interesting is the knowledge that went behind every little thing. And I think a lot of that has to be hats off to Court, the set designer, because he knows so much about opera that he was able to put little finesses in, like from the frames to the chandelier to the teacups, like his knowledge for opera and what those people would hold and what would be around them. There's like little secrets for opera lovers. So I think that's one of my favorite things about this show, is that there's so much care in everything that Court was able to design and then translate even through properties as well.
Monday on Navigating Life.
We are going to be talking about the importance of maintaining and controlling your balance as we age.
If you don't challenge your balance, it doesn't get better.
Check out a new episode of Navigating Life every Monday at couriertimes.com. Tuesday on Cook This.
I'm making a cinnamon potatoes with a yogurt dill sauce. I know what you're thinking. Cinnamon on potatoes? So good.
Check out a new episode of Cook This every Tuesday at couriertimes.com. Friday on In the Garden.
Today we're at Howell Living History Farm.
People can visit throughout the year, helping us with the actual farming operations.
Check out a new episode of In the Garden every Friday at couriertimes.com. Sunday on Ask the Pet Vet.
Well, we're going to start talking about microchipping horses in the future. If your horse were ever to get loose or get stolen, you'd be able to find them.
New episodes of Ask the Pet Vet every Sunday at couriertimes.com.